Hello everyone, I am Dustin and you're watching my channel Steeplehat Studios. Today we're going on to part 5 of the Hail Caesar walkthrough. We're going to start right off where we left. We were on blunders last time and now we're looking at initiative moves. In Hail Caesar we were talking about how commanders, and here's a commander here, give orders to units. And you measure the distance from the commander's head to the unit base and you roll dice and see if they can successfully complete an order that you've given them. Now when you're using a commander you can essentially get up to 3 moves. Well, there is another situation where you don't need a commander. You can use initiative. So say I'm playing the game and I order up my unit and he gets to about here. Okay, and I've measured this out to be within 12 inches of an enemy. When you reach within 12 inches of an enemy, you can choose to, instead of taking orders from the commander, you can instead have the unit's leader make a single order. Okay, he can act on his own initiative. The initiative moves, part of the phase, is the very first thing you do on the command phase. So if you have units that are within 12 inches of an enemy, and it doesn't matter if you can see them or not. I mean, you could be here, not see the enemy, and that's still in 12 inches. You can still act on the unit leader's initiative and give him a command. But yeah, if you have units that are 12 inches and you only need them to make one move or do something without any dice rolls, you can just simply give that unit an order with one move to do. In this case for infantry it would be 6 inches. Maybe I'm here and I say, okay, move towards the enemy. He can move 6 inches towards the enemy without rolling any dice. And that is the initiative move. The initiative move is considered an order. So if you use an initiative move, this commander cannot also give them an order. You're either using your commander's orders or you're using the unit's initiative to move once. You do not have to use initiative in Hail Caesar. If they're within 12 inches, and say I wanted to charge that unit, let's say I'm back here, an initiative move is not going to allow me to charge. I need 2 movements at least to get into charging there. So there may be some situations where I still want to use the commander to give that unit an order. Because here I could say charge the enemy on initiative, they're only going to move 1 move and end up there. Whereas the commander, you give him an order and you get a good dice roll, that would do it. If I had 8 leadership, it would get him into the unit. So initiative is very situational. You'll often use it when you get really close to an enemy or you want to back away without risking losing any dice rolls or risking losing an order. And I should say that initiative is always the first part of the command phase. It should always be done before you roll for commands. But if you forget or have a really big game, usually opponents are pretty forgiving on it. I mean, you shouldn't be so strict. You might have like 20 units aside and you mess up or forget something you want to do. But I would say that if it is going to change the outcome of a game, that you always try and do initiative first. Okay, free movement. Yes, sometimes you can get free movement without any orders in the game. Well, actually that's not true. You'll get an order but you'll fail. Free moves happen on some units, or rather some units get free moves if they fail an order. Basically, in a situation like say here, say I'm giving an order from this commander to this Roman Hastati unit here. Hastati are drilled. Drilled is a special rule in Hail Caesar that allows you to make 1 movement on a failed order. So let's say this guy here orders them to march towards those Numidians, and let's see what I roll. Let's say I fail that instead of that good roll, not a blunder. Say I get 10, okay, and 10 means that in a leadership of 8 I would not be able to make a move. However, because they are drilled, they can do at least 1 move on a failed order. And so lots of units have this rule, and then they can just do 1 move. And that would be it. That would be the free move. The rest of the turn would be over. And yeah, you'd at least move 1 guy in that situation. Other units that can do free moves are units in columns. We were talking about columns. So just like these drilled Romans here, if you fail an order, a unit in a column can still move once. It also says in the book that there's tiny units and scouts. If you put them in a scenario, we don't typically use them. Baggage, carriage, and wagons can move once if they fail an order if they're on a road or a track. Some units have special rules, like I said here, drilled, that allow them to move once for free. And the final thing is broken divisions. If you have a broken division in the army, the only order you give a broken division is to retreat off the field, go towards the nearest table edge. If they fail an order when they're doing that, they can still move once for free. And you might think, well, what's the point? Why not just take off all the units from the table when a division is broken, because they're not coming back. It's not always wise to do that, because sometimes your fleeing troops can get in the way of the enemy, which is good for you, or they can get in the way of your own troops, which is not good. So we never just remove a broken division unless it's like out of the way or up to the side of the board or something. So yeah, broken divisions, if you get an order in a broken division and it fails, that one unit can move for free as well. The one exception here is there might be situations where I want to do a divisional order, okay? So let's say I order all of these guys to move forward towards the Numidians. These two units have drilled, but this unit does not. If I fail this roll, say I roll at 10 again, these two units have drilled, and they are still able in this divisional order to make that one move. However, this unit is not drilled, so it will not be moving. Because it's a divisional order, you still cannot move without 6 inches of the formation. So even though the divisional order would have failed, these two guys can still make their move, but they all have to stay within 6 inches of one of the units within that divisional order. Okay, here's a situation about giving orders to units in combat. We've got these Hastati here who bravely decided to take on these Numidians, but this elephant has flanked them. So, should I order my unit to escape the combat? I cannot do that, because once a unit is in combat, it cannot receive any orders. When a unit gets into combat or it becomes support and is engaged, part of an engagement, then it cannot receive any sort of orders. The only thing that could really happen is that this leader could decide to join that unit, in which that case he'd be part of it, and we'll talk about that later. There are some rules in Hail Caesar, special rules. One of them is called feigned flight, and that allows you to leave a combat. Numidians, the Numidian cavalry have this rule, and some cavalrymen, they can just like be in the combat, give an order to leave after, but they have to have that special feigned flight rule. But normally you cannot receive any orders if you are in a combat or an engagement. Okay, so I've been playing on this about 6x4 foot gaming table here, but the edge or the board is not the limits of the game. You can have units that are off the table. Okay, so in some situations, maybe you've got a massive army. Here I only have these guys. But let's say I've set these guys up like this, and I've told my opponent, there's another unit here, but he's off the board right now. He's not seen on the board, but he's here. He's off the board. You can give orders to units that are not yet on the table. Okay, so how does that work? Well, normally what you do is you find your commander, and you measure from the commander's head to the edge of the board of where they are. Then you just do your normal test. Do they come on? Roll the dice. Okay, 8. And then what you do is from the edge, let's take this unit, let's say that's the unit off. From the edge, he's coming on, and then he makes his move from the edge onto the table. It's that simple, okay? You may also make a divisional order, where you could have all these guys here. Okay, you could say, I'm going to give a divisional order for all these guys to move forth, and there's a unit behind here. You can give them all a divisional order, and the fellow behind them could also march on alongside with them. You just have to state who they're behind and who they are with. Now I should mention here that if a unit is off the table, it can only make a move of 6 inches on its first order move. So let's say I have cavalry over here, and this guy says, move up to those trees, okay? The very first move on a successful roll, let's say I roll really well and I get a 3 on my leadership. Let's say I roll a 3 on my leadership for him. The very first move he has to do is move from the edge of the board, and he can only move 6 inches. Okay? Cavalry normally, let's say medium and light cavalry in a form formation, they have 9 inches. But any unit, regardless of speed or type, it can only move 6 inches onto the board when it's starting off the table. So that's one thing to note. So cavalry off the table only moves 6 as their first move. After that, they're free to move. You know, he had 2 more moves. He can move his full. If he's light cavalry, maybe he's got another 18 or something, depending on the unit. Okay. Finally, sometimes you can also say a commander is off the table. And if that is the case, you just assume that wherever the edge of the table is, the commander is automatically within 12 inches of them. And I'd say he just pops right on with the rest of the units when he comes on. Okay. Sometimes you'll be playing the game and a situation will come where a unit is chased off a table. If a unit is shaken and chased off a table, it's gone, okay? So sometimes we're fighting and a unit will be shaken and they'll have to give ground as a result from combat. That unit's just gone and it cannot come back. So if you have shaken units that run off the table, they cannot have orders to come back on. If you have a unit that is not shaken and it goes off the table, you just order it back on, as we stated, with the 6-inch first move coming back on. And then that's it. That's basically all. Okay, now disordered units and orders. Disorder in this game is a status that allows you to, well, when a unit is disordered, bad things happen. If you're disordered in this game, you cannot receive any orders. So let's say that these Hastati are here, and I don't know, let's say they're within 6 inches, and they want to charge these Numidians, but it's the Numidians' turn. The Numidians throw some javelins at them, and the Numidians end up scoring a disorder. Say these Romans have to give ground disordered 6 inches. Okay? Then it's the Romans' turn. The Romans cannot receive any order. They're disordered right now. When a unit's disordered, they simply cannot move in the command phase and have to wait until the end of the turn when disorder is gone. Okay? So that is also included for initiative moves. If you could move with initiative on that unit, they cannot take any orders. No initiative moves, no orders whatsoever. There are some exceptions, however. Let's say these skirmishers here. Let's say these skirmishers are the ones that get shot at, and they're disordered. Units that are in open order, they may not be able to take orders from their commanders, but if they're within 12 inches, only disordered open order units can move away on initiative. So these skirmishers, let's say they become disordered from fire, and it's my turn next. They're disordered. The only thing they could do is use initiative to move back once. Okay, that's the only thing, the only type of order they could ever get. And again, we were talking about the drilled special rule in Hail Caesar. If the unit is disordered here, let's say that Hastati unit is disordered for whatever reason, they cannot use the drilled free move. The only unit that can use a free move when it's disordered are units that are broken in a broken division, and they still get the free move to move off the table. And I think that makes sense, right? They're broken, they're scared, they're running, they don't care about order right now, they're just trying to get out. So order or not, they are going to be making a free move to the table edge. So yeah, with the exception of open order units moving away or avoiding a combat when they're disordered, and broken divisions moving once when they're disordered, when the unit is disordered, they simply cannot take any orders from the commander or use their initiative. There's a lot more on disorder, but we'll talk about that later on when we talk about fighting and combats and such. Let's talk about the actual movement of units. The book is fairly liberal and doesn't really state how to measure moving. All the book says is that units are able to move in any direction freely. So a lot of games, like if you move forward, you get a standard move. In some games, if you move backwards, you halve the unit's movement. In Hail Caesar, that doesn't exist. It's very fun and very straight. I mean, you can go forward 6 inches, and that's a move from an order. You can go backward 6 inches, that's a move from an order. You can go this way 6 inches, that's a move from just one order. So you can go diagonal and it doesn't matter. The direction doesn't matter as long as they don't break their formation. In this case, these hastati are in battle line. If I wanted to form a square, that'd be a move. It would count as one move from an order. But right now, they can move in which direction you want to move in. One thing I said wrong, and may have said in the last video, was turning like so, okay? I actually went and talked to Rick Priestley on Facebook, and I asked him how movement works, because what I had seen and seen other people play is one turn counts as the full movement. However, the rules say that the movement is by inches, right? It says in the book here that, I'll tell you the inches soon, but it says in the book that it's the distance covered essentially. So I talked to Rick, and he told me basically what he would do, or rather I assume what he'd do because he explained it to me, is that when he moves at an angle, he's taking the distance from that turn there that the majority of the units would make. So let's say I want to turn this way and face that way. Oh, there goes my commander. So I want to turn that way. Something like turning like this moves these units. Let's say he moves him. It may move him 2 inches. And then since infantry have 6 inches, I can move another 4 inches that way. Whereas before, we were, I think, doing it wrong. And I was pointed out by one of our members here in my group, Tim, that turning shouldn't just count as one move. So I apologize in part 4 because you should be able to make like a full move. The book also talks about doing like fancy maneuvers. Like what if I want to do something like woo? Like they can do that as long as you figure out a proper way to measure. You could totally do like a U-turn there if you ordered them to do it. You just have to figure out a proper measurement. So the book is very liberal on movement. You can move, like I said, all over the place. It's a lot of fun. We'll talk about proximity soon. That will limit how you move and what you do with it. But yeah, movement itself, every unit type has a different value for movement. And I'll just read off the chart here. You know, if you get like infantry or elephants or wagons or artillery or really heavy chariots or cataphract cavalry, they're only moving 6 inches, right? So the max these guys could ever move is 18 inches if they get a good order. Light chariots and other formed cavalry, meaning like medium cavalry and light cavalry, they are moving 9 inches. And then light cavalry and open order and horse archers get a massive 12 inches. I love light cavalry because you just break them into open order and they can just like fly all over the map. So light cavalry are some of my favorite units in the game. But yeah, it's basically 6, 9, and 12 inches depending on the unit. And that's with the right order, that's those really fast units have a huge potential to get to the other side of the board really quickly. We're going to talk about proximity now. Proximity is a very interesting rule. And I think a lot of people who play Hail Caesar for the first time, or even people who played a lot, are sometimes, I don't want to say confused, but they might forget it or think it's strange. But once you start using it, it actually really makes sense. Proximity of an enemy is basically when you get close enough to an enemy, you are restricted to move either away from it or towards it. And that we'll show you how that works here. So right now I've measured this. This elephant here is over there, and I've got this hastati unit here is 14 inches away. Proximity comes into play when you move within 12 inches of an enemy that is facing you. So let's say I give an order. Okay, we roll some dice. What is that? An 8? Okay, he rolled an 8 on his turn, and he can move 6. Let's say he moves up 6, however much that is. Now he's within 12 inches of that elephant. What does that mean? Proximity means that this unit now, as long as it's within 12 inches of that elephant, can only move towards the elephant or back away. He can no longer move to the side, move to the right. He is obliged, the rule book says, he has to move towards or away from the elephant. Okay? So 12 inches is the amount. that you measure from there. He could still break into a square. He's not breaking into another formation, is not moving away. It's just changing formation. So if I wanted to, and I'm in 12 inches, I could say, okay, form a square. And yeah, then the elephant would probably be, well, I'll show you here in a bit. The elephant here might be subject to the proximity rule. So when Hail Caesar says that, the rule book, when it says that a unit is facing the enemy, it means that at least a part of the enemy unit is directly in front of the center front position, okay? So let's say we have this scenario here. There's the elephant. My center front is roughly where that middle pilum is. Pilum, I forget the plural, or whatever, it's that big throwing stick the Romans have. And now the Romans have to move towards or back from the elephant. They don't have a choice. That's the only thing they can do. They have to go forward towards the elephant or backwards. If they want to sneak around the elephant, that's too bad. They cannot do that. They have to move back away out of 12 inches and then go around. Chances are, though, the elephant might move forward. So this is to keep troops locked in kind of like a face-off scenario. You know, realistically, if you're up here and you're about to engage, you're not going to make a big fancy move around them. The unit's going to attack you when you're doing that. So it's kind of to set a face-off in Hail Caesar, if you will. Okay, let's say these hastati here have these two enemies in their front. Okay, and I just told you that when a unit is properly facing a foe, it will have a unit directly in its center front here. However, we said that facing a unit counts as having a unit directly in the center front line of the unit that's part of proximity. And here, the center front goes right between those two units. So is this unit, does it have to use a proximity rule? It does, because if you're moving within 12 inches towards an enemy, and you have enemies to your front, you must, at some point, face an enemy with the center front. Okay, so you can't just be like, okay, I'm just going to keep marching towards that way. No, the rules say here that even if you have a unit partially to your front, just even a little bit, so like even if this elephant was over here and these Numidians were over here, after you make your move, at least one of those movements have to be facing towards one of those foes. You probably do the elephant because it's closer. So it says within the rules that once you come within 12 inches of an enemy, and say in this situation, let's say he's over here, let's say he's 19 inches away and he rolls an 18, something like that, okay? And his order was to go towards the elephant. He comes in within 12 inches, he's obliged and must face a foe. He has to in one of those moves and then move towards them. He cannot just keep going straight, okay? Proximity is going to force you to face. He could, perhaps, move straight on the rest of his move, but his very last one would have to be turn and go towards the elephant, as he stated. So once you get within 12 inches, you're going to be having a center front of a unit facing an enemy. And that's the proximity rule on the formed units. So I'm going to try and give you guys the rule book diagram example of another way proximity will limit you. Here's our hastati unit, and this is directly from a chart in the book. We have an elephant that's to the right there. Let's ignore these skirmishers. Say they're not there. We have an elephant there that is just partially to the front of this unit's front there, and he's within 12 inches. And then I've measured exactly 16 inches away 2 units of Numidians over there. Now straight down the middle to this unit's center front, he's not facing a foe. Okay, remember facing means that it's a line from this drawn from the center front towards that way. So there's a gap in there. Now, he can move. He's got an enemy here within 12, so he is obliged to follow proximity. But in this scenario, let's say he rolls a command roll and he gets, I'll cheat there, give him a 4 and he gets a massive 18 movement. He has to move in a way that makes him face one of these enemies. He does not necessarily have to go for the elephant. He could move up 6, move up another 6 for 12. But then by this point, he would have to turn to face one of the foes because proximity locks him to do that. He couldn't just keep marching forward. No, he is obliged to. He must. He could even turn to face. It'd probably be foolish, but he could turn to face that. But in that situation, he actually couldn't, and I'll tell you why he couldn't just turn to face the elephant. If he marched up here, the minute he turns towards something, all proximity has locked him down. So if he chooses to turn this way, he can now only move towards or backwards from that Numidian unit. If he chooses to turn this way, he can only move towards or backwards. Okay? So even if he wanted to turn and look at it, he couldn't because the proximity would stop him, and he'd have to face off against that unit. So proximity is the lockdown of units, if you will. Once you're within 12 inches, you are obliged to face the foe in some way. Facing meaning where the center front is a direct line towards an enemy. Okay, so that's one unique thing, or I don't know if it's in other games, maybe it's in War Master where Hail Caesar and Black Powder is all that from. I don't think it is, but yeah, I really appreciate Hail Caesar for this because you really have to early on plan your flanks. You can't just you can't just march up and you can't do that. Once you get within 12, you must move towards or backwards from the enemy. And in that example I showed you there, you have to, if you're moving towards an enemy and you're within 12 with units to the front, then you have to face as one of your moves. You're obliged to. And of course here in this situation, proximity doesn't come into play. Proximity is always from the front of the unit. It will probably, if the Romans move forward, he will be in proximity of that unit there. But if enemies are side by side and neither of them are facing each other, they don't follow proximity at all. It only comes into play when you face the foe. And in this case, it's not to the front, he's not actually facing the elephant. So, but to say the elephant here turns, the minute he gets, oh, he's facing now the elephant can only move forward or backwards. He can't continue his turn and go on his way. No, proximity will lock him to go forwards or backwards from that unit. So that's proximity, and it's fairly important. One thing to note, you have the original edition of the rule book. The rule has an error in it on page 34 that does not say obliged to face the foe. It just says within 12 inches face the foe. So I used to think proximity counted when you're here. You're within 12 inches, I have to face the foe. Not true. It's only when you actually have a front towards a foe that you're obliged to face something. Okay? So here's a situation where I put some skirmishers in front of my hastati. Since units block line of sight, these skirmishers are masking this unit here, which means that the Numidians there and the hastati there are not, even though they are within 12 inches of each other, they're not going to be, they don't have to apply proximity. Okay? Skirmishers can be ignored for proximity. So these Numidians, even though they can't see these Romans, they see the masking unit, but they can ignore skirmishers because skirmishers cannot charge formed units. So formed units can upright just ignore any skirmishers for proximity. So if these guys wanted to, the commander of this force would say, okay, move left over to the trees, his left over to the trees, and it would be a perfectly legal move because the skirmishers are blocking the line of sight, they're masking that unit, and there's no proximity to take into effect for the Numidians there. And these Romans likewise, because they can't draw the line of sight through that masking unit, can just move around this way. But say they move over here, the minute they get here, they will be obliged to face because now they've got an enemy to their front, as we described before. So a lot of foes will do this. They'll mask their forces, protect them from arrows or from proximity as they're moving forward. The best way to deal with this, or how I probably would deal with it, is I would just charge the skirmishers. The player might be crazy like I am and have the skirmishers hold. But chances are they'll evade and they will move through these guys and you will collide with the Romans anyhow. So, yeah, open order units can mask, block the proximity of formed units, and you can still move about as long as that open order skirmish or open order light infantry or open order cavalry are there. One thing to note though is that open order units do also have proximity, just like formed units, except instead of 12 inches, it's 6 inches, which makes them a lot more flexible. So let's say these guys are 7 inches away from these Numidians. They could still find a way, as long as they're not within 7 inches, to kind of like sweep around the opponent. And I think that makes sense because open order units are more flexible. But once they move within 6, they are now restrained with proximity, meaning they can only move forward and backwards. And since skirmishers have a 360-degree frontage, you have to be careful of doing that because, yeah, there'll be many places where you're only allowed to be going forward or backwards with the skirmishers because their frontage is all over the place. So just to end today's video, I want to give you all a quick example of how the initiative and proximity might work. I've got my guys all set up here. I've got some skirmishers to the side. I've got some hastati here facing against these various Numidian and elephant units here. So it's my turn on the Romans, and I pre-measure to see if I'm in proximity. Well, these guys are out of 12 inches, so that means they won't be doing initiative either. These guys don't have any enemy directly to their front within 12, but there is an elephant to their front on the side, partially so here, that's within 12. They also could use initiative to order. And the only thing that these guys could do is, because there is an enemy within 12, is if they use initiative, the only thing they'd be doing is turning to face. Because it says in the rules that if you have an enemy partially to your front within 12, but not directly, you're just obliged to turn to face the foe. However, I don't want to do that. Okay, so I want to move towards those Indians. I want to try and ignore this elephant. Okay? If this elephant was directly in my center front, I'd have no choice to do it. But because he's not there, I do still have to face a foe when I move. So I could order these 2 units to charge the Numidians in front of me, which I will. I roll a 7. Let's say my leadership is 9. Okay. And that would be 2 moves. As soon as I hit this 12-inch mark, now I'm in proximity. I have no choice but to go forward or backwards, and the full movement here would be like so. Now, even though this guy's to my side, partially in the front, I don't have to turn to face him, because he's not directly in my center front for proximity. As long as by the time the end movement, or the last bit of my moves, carries me in a way that allows me to face the foe, then this is perfectly legal. So I end my turn facing those Numidians. I didn't have to turn and face him because I gave him the order to move forward and still face a foe. So in that kind of situation there, you can, for proximity, not necessarily have to turn towards the closest enemy to your front if he's off to the side. As long as you move and have the center front by the end of that move towards an enemy, then it's perfectly legal. Okay. Now, let's say it's the Numidians' turn here. The only thing these Numidians here can now do is, because the center front here has a unit there, and the center front here has a unit directly in front, they can either charge or move backwards. They can't go left or right or anything like that. Okay? The elephant here has nobody to his front. He has nothing to worry about proximity. He does have enemies here though, within 12. So the elephant player has a choice. He could spend some turns to move, and if we use the Rick Priestley way, which I think is the right way, let's say he turns like that, that's about 2 inches. I think I'm measuring right, and another 2, that's 4. Now he's got an enemy to his center front within 12. He has to move away or back from that enemy. So then he could move another 2 inches towards the enemy. And that would be his initiative move, if he was using initiative. That's all he could really do. However, let's do that again. The other thing I could do is, I could potentially say, okay, well, why don't I try and give him an order instead of initiative? I order let's use initiative here. These guys use initiative to charge the hastati. These guys use to charge the hastati. Here it doesn't necessarily matter how it lines. Well, it does actually matter how it lines up, but we'll get to that later. But say they charge here and they're fighting, and I want the elephant to charge too. He is I'd say the way he's positioned would put him in the back. Let's see if we can get the commander with the leadership of 9 back there to charge. We got 9 in, so with a movement of 9, he'd be turning however many distance, and then he'd only be able to move 2. Because you actually need 2 movements to charge once you change into the proximity, but we'll get to that later. So yeah, the game might look something like that with proximity, where you have a unit to the side of the front, but not fully at the front. As long as you make a movement that eventually faces an enemy, is legal. If I were to use initiative here, the only legal move I could do would be face the elephant, because he is at my front. I have to be facing directly center front of my line. So you can see here how restricting that is for proximity. I can't just go like this, or go like this way, no. Or like if I'm here, oops, say I'm here and here, thanks to proximity, I can't charge this way in front of that unit, or choose another target. I have to go straight to what's directly into my front line.